Welcome to today's webinar, and thank you very much for lending us your time. And hopefully this webinar can be helpful to you in terms of going through this year's audit process. And so basically, I just to introduce myself, Matthew Clemo from CSI, working as a financial services lead within the sector. I've been working in the building society sector for about 10 years, and we work with a number of building societies.
Good morning. My name's Jeff Poulter. I work for a company called A Consulting. I'm a principal consultant with AJC. I've been in the financial services area for about 30 years. My background is obviously security and IT. I've been the head of IT for an international organisation and now very much working in the consultancy sector.
Good morning. Mark Weaver here, working at CSI. Been working in the financials sector for about 3 years now, working on a lot of transformation pieces as a cloud technical architect.
And good morning, Leighton Jeffries, responsible for all things security within CSI, helping with security services and strategy around vendors and the design of the security solutions within our portfolio.
Good. Yes, today we're going to try and make it as interactive as possible. So obviously it's a bit of a show and tell and give you as much information we can, which we think is relevant in terms of what we've seen over the last year, especially. So we're going to have a couple of polls, and we're going to have a good, hopefully some good question and answer session at the end. So today we have CSI and A Consulting presenting to you, and basically A Consulting are specialists within the audit arena, and they will talk you through the Swift architecture, our audit preparation and gotchas, and and CSI will talk about how we work with our existing customers in terms of delivering Swift compliant desktops in Azure. Next slide, please. I think just to give a little context, around about this time last year, I had a number of customers reach out to me going, we're going through the Swift audit, how can you help us? And that threw the challenge to us, how we can help building societies. And I think probably most societies had the same issue in terms of it taking on a new audit on board, understanding that audit and how can we do that efficiently and cost effectively. And it was a challenge for us. I talked to our internal CISO, and he felt that to start from scratch, to learn the process and to execute it would take quite a lot of time. And I think most organizations had to go back to their traditional internal auditors and fulfill the obligation through that way, which could have been quite expensive. So it was fortuitous that CSI, we were hosting a tech hub at the BSA annual conference in the spring, and we met with AJ Consulting, and they've had basically a more of a optimized solution in terms of helping building societies through the process, and I thought they would be a great for us to team up with them, because we've had experience in terms of executing compliant solutions to go through this. So I thought we'd do it today. I thought it's an opportune time to maybe help you understand if you've got existing challenges of what AJ Geology have seen going through that process. So I would like to maybe hand you over to Jeff from A Jolly Consulting. I think we'll be starting with a poll, I believe. Jeff, is that right?
That's right. So thank you very much, Matthew. So we've got a poll now just going up, and we'd like to understand where you are in your Swift audit process at the moment for 2022. So there's a few options there. I wonder if you could just quickly select the radio button, and that will just give us a quick view. We're kind of really thinking about where we can to tailor today as to whether this is something that you're here to help you prepare for an audit still this year, or whether in fact this is perhaps preparation for next year. Now, I'm not sure I can actually see who's voting and who isn't. but I think we'll get the outcome shortly. Here we go. Right. Okay, that's great to know. So we've got 13% people have not started, 47% are still gathering evidence, 13% have booked their audit. Nobody's undertaken their audit supposedly, but some of them, well, sorry, that's not quite true, because a few have actually started on their attestation, which obviously means that the audit must have finished. And of course, there's always a few people that aren't quite sure where the rest of the organization is. So thank you for that. Very useful to know. So I think a good half of the audience really are just getting underway still. So that's good to know. Thank you. Okay, so I work for AJC, A-Jolly Consulting, but I'll refer to AJC throughout, as most people do. You probably haven't heard of AJC. A good number of people haven't. We are a specialist independent consultancy. Our expertise very much is based on risk management, fraud prevention, cybersecurity, and data protection, DR. We've been around since 2017. And we're very much a growing business. Our methodology is very much to bring in industry experts, if you like. So what we're not is a set of accountants that have been cross-trained to do some of these sort of audit type roles. We are very much industry professionals. Our staff have very much come from the risk sort of teams within large organizations, from cybercrime and cybersecurity backgrounds, from IT security backgrounds. And so we're very much a case of we are seasoned professionals that have basically been there, done it ourselves. Whoops, there we are, one too many clicks. Yeah, we've been there. We try to offer very much a practical and proportionate service. We obviously want to deliver what the customer wants, be that an audit or some other piece of work. And we're geared to offer value for money, especially compared to some of the big audit companies out there. We are very much international. That's just a quick show of where we've done work in the past. This isn't all Swift work, but some of it is. We're obviously UK headquartered, but it is very much an international business. A lot of our work is done remotely. A couple of the pins there over on the right hand side, Papua New Guinea and Tonga, I've personally done audits for them. Unfortunately, I never got to set foot in those places. I'd very much love to, but we tend to work totally remotely, and of course that very much means that we can be very much international. We're based in out of 3 teams really. We've got a UK centered but European team. We're not just in the UK, and from there we tend to look after the US and Africa as well, and we do have clients in all of those areas. We've got 2 other teams in Asia and an Australia team, so we do have worldwide coverage, whether that be for Swift audits or other pieces of work. 30+ consultants, it's forever growing, because as the work grows, we simply bring in more consultants. We're not like a big organization which has to go through lots of levels of sign off, etc. As the work grows, we grow. It's as simple as that. And thinking specifically about the Swift audits, we're very much agnostic. We do Swift audits for anybody that wants them. A lot of our clients are banks and building societies, but we also have a lot of financial services organizations, and we've done plenty of other companies as well. Oil companies, airlines, pensions, payments, whoever needs a Swift audit. A lot of people think that the Swift audits kind of started last year in 2021. Of course, it didn't. That was the first year that you needed to have an independent view of your compliance, but everybody had to sign up and say they were compliant for a lot earlier than that, and some organizations actually requested third-party help to do that much earlier. So we did our first Swift audit for a Japanese bank back in 2017, and we've been having an increasing sort of client base ever since then. Last year, we hit over 70 audits, and we're currently on track for over 100 this year. In terms of the building societies, which is why you're here, we very much understand your business. You know, we've have a large number of building societies on our client books. We understand about the minimal scope that you have in terms of the Swift audit, and therefore that means that a number of the controls are very much de-scoped. So therefore we can work with you, we can keep it very proportionate to your business. There's things like new controls that came out this year. There was control 2.9 for those that are aware of the Swift audits, the bounds of business checks, things like that, that we understand your business and know straight away that actually it simply doesn't apply to you and your RTGS use. So we've seen everything, quite frankly, in the number of organisations we've audited over the years. We've seen the good, we've seen the bad, and if we use the expression, we've seen the ugly as well. But everything in between, really. And it is very much a case of getting prepared makes such a huge difference to the outcome of your audit. And we've seen a lot of companies that have some preparation and some that aren't so prepared at all. And we're going to share a number there. Last bullet point there about the security office. I have to say that wasn't a building society. Get that absolutely clear. If there's the security officers in the audience today, what we were talking about there was outside of that. But it's a good point to illustrate that this isn't a pure IT audit. It is a Swift-centric audit, and it's about the business aspects of Swift as well. And sometimes just putting a security officer in front of the auditor isn't sufficient unless they've got a good knowledge of how Swift is used. So today we wanted to share some thoughts with you, starting right up front where some design considerations can really simplify your Swift audit. Then we're going to just cover a few points on simple preparation that's going to help you, and then cover a few gotchas. And at that point, then I'll be handing back to our CSI colleagues. So I'm just going to run through these now. Okay, so looking at the design of your audits, RTGS use within a building society isn't something that's got to scale up massively. Obviously, you only use it to get to the Bank of England to basically do some defund activities out of the account. So you're never going to need a very large number of users doing that. And the Swift audit is very much non-prescriptive. It says what you need to achieve. It doesn't try and tell you how to do it, which is excellent. And as we audit many organisations, we can see how organisations have approached that very differently. What you do need to consider is your architecture very much sets your scope. Now, for building societies, I've audited organisations where they've had a single central PC. Somebody from finance who's going to do a defund will go and sit at that single PC and log on with an account, and that PC is very much locked down and restricted. Other organisations have taken it slightly further and had a pair of machines for resiliency, and others have gone to say, well, no, we're going to have all of our finance team to do it, and therefore they're going to do it from all of their machines. Again, the point I want to make is that the greater the access that you provide, so more and more items come into scope, and that you really need to be able to segregate. And virtual machines, which is where CSI are going to come in and talk to us a little bit later today, can certainly help in that in a big way. Now, I'm not saying you have to use a virtual machine, but you do need to think about all of your networking scope. So if you are going to have a range of PCs that can connect, then you have got to think about, how am I going to segregate? Am I going to have a separate IP range of VLAN, if you like, just for those people? Can I lock down my internet just for that specific range? There's a number of controls where the smaller the number, the more specific you can be, the simpler it will be when it comes to your audit. Authentication is another area to consider. So the Swift standards have to be written for organizations of all sizes. And they basically try to encourage you in some ways not to use your standard Active Directory account. And again, there's different ways you can approach this. Obviously, some organizations tend to create a specialist second AD account, and they can do some lockdowns based on that account. That account is the only account that can get out to Swift. That account is the only one can get onto central or virtual machines. And sometimes if they've got a specialist dedicated set of PCs, then they can actually introduce local accounts. There's a little bit of danger with using local accounts. It's not wrong in itself, but you have got to remember that you've got to have policies in place, including some local policies to make sure that you're fully protected. Again, virtual machines can very much help there in terms of that lockdown. And then two-factor authentication. We know that's a Swift requirement, and it does still catch organizations out. And there's obviously multiple ways to do that. I do audit organizations, not building societies, where they've very much introduced fingerprint reading. And everybody who's using Swift has to have a fingerprint reader. That's very expensive and not really where you want to go. The building societies generally have gone for the traditional approach of having a USB type plug-in device, which holds certificates. But that can limit you as well. The next step up of that, of course, is to use a physical fob. It's the sort of device that might have a display a number that changes every few seconds, and all the users that have need Swift access would type in the number at that point. That's a little bit old hat. As somebody else put it to me, it's very much environmentally unfriendly because they have a very limited shelf life. And these days, the use of authenticator apps makes things very simple. Just about everybody has a mobile phone, and you can decide whether you want to allow personal mobile phones or issue company mobile phones. But using Authenticator app does make things very simple. And equally, it's going to help if you go for a virtual setup. So there's some design considerations to think about when you're just doing your architecture. And certainly when the way that AJC work, and I'll come on to that a little bit later, is for any client that we're involved in doing their audit, throughout the rest of the year, we're available for a little piece of consultancy, some questions and answers about if you're going to do some architecture changes, then we're happy to just give you a little bit of advice about what makes things compliant or not compliant. So the second area I wanted to share with you today is all about preparing for your audit. And some of this is really quite straightforward, but it's worth just thinking about and taking note. So like any audit, it's very much a case of documentation and evidence. It's not just about what you're doing. It needs to be a case of where's it written down, and then show me that that's what you actually do. In practice, obviously, they should align. The detail can differ, but they should basically align. So for every control, it's worth just thinking, where's it written down? Is there a policy? Is there a procedure? Is there a design document? Is there a user guide? Something like that. So for every control, just think, have I got a document that I could present to the auditor? But obviously the audit isn't a documentation review. The auditor is going to be pleased for that. That document sets your standard, and then they're going to want to see, now where's the evidence that backs that up? And a bugbear of mine personally is that when I'm doing the audits, I reckon 20% of my time is sitting there waiting for people trying to find the documents that say, yeah, we've got one of those. I'm sure we have. I'll find it. Just give me a few more minutes. And when that's control after control, it just shows that actually a little bit of preparation, putting those together in a single place, would have made things so much smoothly. In terms of evidence, you've just got to think about what you're presenting, and some of that depends on who you are, and we're going to come on to that in just a moment. But sometimes it's great to be able to just demonstrate through portals that are perhaps looking after your estate that this is what we have in place. And so you can do that broad range. But just bear in mind that the auditor's trying to look at perhaps your Swift PCs, and so often they might want to drill down. And just having a few screenshots at the broad level isn't always sufficient. It's good to have somebody on hand to be able to drill down through those portals. Equally, you can go onto specific machines. There's, the standards doesn't say how you have to achieve it. It's up to you how you want to go through the audit. You could jump onto specific machines, but if the specific machines are locked down, then portals definitely help with that. So our second area to think about is the team that's going to be involved in your audit. And again, this might sound a little bit straightforward, but often we sit there in front of a set from the building society or from other organisations, and there's maybe 1 or 2 people. But actually, it's a bit of a team effort. You're going to need different skill sets. You're going to need different subject matter experts involved. A security officer or a compliance officer can often head the audit, and that's great. But often it's good to have somebody from IT there that can simply jump on, help with the demonstrating, can drill down, go into that extra level of detail for when the auditor asks that other question that they hadn't thought of in advance. A number of the controls are easily helped by having an end user just demonstrate the end-to-end process. Quite straightforward. IT often can't do the end-to-end process, of course not, because of segregation of duties, and that's where it's good to have an end user available some of the time. Again, segregation of duties on account management. IT often look after most of the accounts apart from Swift accounts where it's under business control, and that's an area where it often needs somebody else to just come in and explain and demonstrate. Outsourcing. A lot of building societies, a lot of the smaller organisations outsourced at least some of their services. And an area where organisations get stuck is when they say, well, we outsource that, so I don't know how to demonstrate it. If you thought about it in advance, you can actually line up some of your providers to just being available for an hour or 2 as part of the audit to go through some of the things that they manage for you. And finally, for this kind of this screen, HR. One of the controls is very much about staff vetting and screening, and that's where you're often going to need your HR team to help. Some of the information that they might want to show the auditor is obviously going to be confidential, and they're not going to want to pass that around to everybody on the audit. So just having your HR team involved that can have a breakout session helps. Okay, and then let's move on. So technology is the other area to think about when you're doing your audit. Most audits these days are done through video conferencing. I haven't heard of many people that now go on site. Obviously, the pandemic has changed our perspective of all of these things. And screen sharing is a massive thing. So if you can screen share documents, screen share portal use, screen share screenshots even, then that's brilliant. It makes things nice and simple. But other things to consider, if there's something that's a bit tricky, if somebody isn't going to be available that day because they're going on holiday or whatever, then how about getting them to prepare a small video in advance? Another area where people come unstuck is they say, well, I'd like to show you on the lockdown machine, but it's locked down. I can't put video conference facilities on there. I can't share that way. Just remember, if you're using something like Teams, then Teams can run on a mobile phone. And the great thing about a mobile phone is it's got 2 cameras. There's obviously the forward facing, but there's the away facing. And if you switch to the away facing, you can basically do a video of a computer screen. And that way, that can help demonstrate some aspects of your audit. There's areas of the audit where confidential information is definitely need to be shared. Staff screening, we've already said. So if that's the case, then a little bit of preparation helps there. If you're using checklists either internally or you're using a third party to do screening of staff, extract that data, be that reports or screens, whatever, and just redact names and personally identify information, and then that's what you can share. Likewise, if you are screen sharing, then obviously the person that is sharing is going to have total control over what is shared. That's often important if you're displaying something to do with your logging and monitoring, control 6.4, if you've got a SIEM or something like that. For your cyber incident response plan, then maybe you don't want to share all of the contact information, but you can go further down and actually share how the plan describes your processes. 7.3a, pen tests. Perhaps you don't want to share to an auditor every weakness in your infrastructure. I'd hope you don't, quite frankly. But an executive report, that page could be shared with an auditor. Okay, so there's some simple steps just to think about in advance. What about the gotchas? So just got a couple of pages to really go through here with some of the things where we see people struggle. So starting at the top, network devices. For some reason, audits tend to think of this is what we do on our servers, this is what we do on our PCs. For a Swift audit, we're less concerned about your servers if you're a building society, because obviously your footprint is that you don't have Swift servers. But you've got to remember about your network devices, switches and firewalls. Internet access, we're going to need to see rules to show how you've locked down. If the requirement for 1.4 says that you restrict the internet as much as you can, so we're going to need to see how that is achieved. Yeah, that could be sort of 3 specific rules for IP ranges, but we're going to need to see that. Control 2.2, security updates. That applies to your networks and your switches and firewalls as well. So we're going to want to see that IOS upgrades have taken place. And that's often something that only gets done maybe once a year and often by a third party. So it's not going to be to hand. You're going to need a little bit of preparation there, perhaps again, bringing in a third party to make sure that they can help with that. Likewise for hardening, IOS upgrades help with that. It's not just about having sort of your PCs patched. There's another set of things that you need to consider there as well. For users, another area that catches people out, they're often, IT are usually very, very good, especially with the building societies, at performing user reviews on perhaps an annual basis that gets signed off, privileges checked, etc. And then it comes to the Swift users, and that bit gets forgotten about. So have an annual review of your users. If you've probably only got a handful of people, it's a simple process. Get a list, get it signed off. Do the same for tokens and have a little bit of a written policy to say this is what you do. Critical outsourcing should be one of the simplest things on your Swift audit, but it often catches people out for some reason. Perhaps because of the smaller organizations don't have sort of procurement departments or something like that. So for a critical vendor, you have to show that you are managing that vendor. That's control 2.8a. And what you've got to do is some supplier or vendor management. Basically, it should be very easily to demonstrate. Have I got a contract that has SLAs? Do I have documented service review meetings? Basically a service review meeting with an agenda and a contract makes that nice and simple. But for some reason, it catches out so many organizations. Let's press on. Passwords, again, should be one of the simplest. Minimum password length still catches people out. If you're under 15, the Swift standard is very specific. You've got to have the no LAN manager password being saved. That needs a GPO usually to enforce that throughout your domain. But it isn't necessary if you've got a password of 15 characters or more. Now, users tend to think of, oh, that's huge. But if you've introduced the 3 random word or 4 random word password methodology into your organization, switching the password length to 15, very, very simple. Hardening, again, I've mentioned that. it catches people out. I think partly because they don't necessarily understand what IT hardening is. It consists of 4 things: having the minimum software on the machine in the first place, removing built-in accounts, things like your standard administrator account, having the minimum services running. The classic is that Windows 10 on your PCs comes with a whole load of Xbox processes. You're not playing games on your business machines. Get those services shut down. And then restricting network protocols. And a good auditor is going to want to just see some examples of each of those taking place. So with, again, a little bit of preparation, that should be easy. That links on very much nicely to the GPOs, your group policies. Again, I see a lot of organizations saying, oh, we've got policies that do that. I say, brilliant, show them to me. And they go, oh, I can't remember what they're named. Give me 10 minutes while I hunt through about 30 different policies trying to find it. So again, some good naming or a bit of good documentation makes that so much simpler. And equally, you'll know whether you've got something missing or not. And the last point here then is virtual machines. They are very, very helpful. They can be, they encapsulate is the technical word, the access through to Swift. Therefore, they make it very much a reduced scope, very much easier to audit. Just remember to keep them patched and upgraded. Often from a virtual machine, there's 2 ways of doing things. You can rebuild on an automated process, or you can apply patches like a normal PC or server, and you've got to decide which, but make sure it doesn't get forgotten. So there were some good things to share with you, which I hope you find useful in preparing for your audit. The AJC method of auditing is very much a case of we're on your side. Now, different audit companies are going to take different approaches here, but we very much do a pre-audit and then your official independent audit. Your pre-audit is basically a paid-for dress rehearsal, where we're going to go through in detail with all of the requirements, sign off what we can, but we're basically looking for gaps. It's a gap analysis, and that leaves you with a detailed list of what you need to address, where we're going to come back for a second instance and work with you. We're on your side, and using that approach, it's not a case of you've got to have everything first time round. You haven't got to pay for a second audit. That's part of our fees. It's all part of our process. And as we said in the opening slide, I think we're very cost effective when you compare us to many of the other auditing organizations. And obviously, once you've signed up, as I mentioned one before, there's post-assessment support. If you've got questions about, would it help if we did this? How do we do this? Then we can offer some little bit of help around that outside of the audit process as well. That happens quite often. Organizations are changing their Swift infrastructure, and they basically just got a few questions. What if I do that? Is that okay? And we're happy to take those throughout the year. So I hope going through those today has been very helpful for you. I'm just going to go back to one of the other slides that we saw before, and just to say that those design aspects are going to link very much to what my CSI colleagues are going to talk to you about in just a few minutes. However, just before we do that, we're going to go on to another poll. And we're doing this audit today because we're in Swift audit season. But I'm not sure a lot of people understand that that Swift audit season really lasts 6 months. Everybody tends to leave it to the very last point in the year. And in fact, you could be audited in May and June and a test in July and get it out of the way. So we just like to think about that and ask perhaps, why is it that you leave it as late in the year? Were you not aware, or are there some good reasons for that? So we'd very much be interested in knowing your answer to that. If you could use the poll radio buttons, please. Lovely, thank you very much for that. Well, that is interesting. Yeah, the 20% said they simply didn't know. Another 33% just said they hadn't thought of it like that. There's equally a good percentage there at 27% simply said they'd like to wait till after the summer holidays, and that's quite a valid reason too. Lovely. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. So I'm going to hand over now, I think, back to Mark.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for that. Cool. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay. I'm just going to briefly talk about the requirements and the solution that we did for the Building Society for their Swift audit. So the Building Society had a requirement to deploy a new machine. The old Swift laptop had been around for a fair while. It was due for retirement, and they were looking at alternative measures. So they approached ourselves. We took a look at the requirements that they had and surmised that we could potentially deploy this in a virtual environment. And we had a look. Given the environment, the client had a requirement to deploy the solution in an environment where they could access it from a couple of locations predetermined. So that led ourselves to Azure Virtual Desktop. In there, we had a look and we took a look at the security options in there and decided that was the right option. If we can go to the next slide, please. Great. Okay, so we took a look at this for their environment, and utilizing Azure Virtual Desktop, we were able to deploy a robust image that was stripped down, as Jeff mentioned before, removing things like Xbox and all the stuff that wasn't required. We only allowed a website location that the client, well, the Building Society had in there. We stripped down the security, so only they can access them websites, and we utilized a lot of the inbuilt Azure technology to deliver the robust solution. Only certain users can access this. They can only access this solution via MFA from a predetermined location, utilizing a separate Active Directory account. So multiple layers of security built in there at an infrastructure level. We aligned this hardware, well, the virtual machine, should I say, we aligned this to, firstly, Azure security benchmarking, which ensured that it was valid and secure from Azure platform capability as well. And as well as this, we also aligned the environment to CIS benchmarking, which is for the Center of Internet Security. This ensured that the environment was secure from an external point of view as well for auditing purposes. And that's all I have on this one. So next slide, please. And I will pass over to Leighton.
Thank you, Mark. So I think it's probably just worth saying for those that aren't aware, I'm sure most of the people on this audience today are aware, but the Azure is very much the Microsoft cloud. And whereas we might think of Microsoft hosting servers in the cloud, this is a desktop, a PC that's in the cloud.
Yeah, very much so.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Jeff. Obviously, just to sort of build on in regards to what Jeff and Mark have just been mentioning around different security controls, security frameworks, one of the elements of the solution that we've designed for building societies is to bring in additional enhanced security services. So just to sort of put some context around that, CSI, we have our own cyber security incident response SOC within Birmingham, within the UK. Our facility is fully accredited to 27,000 ISO, 27,001, as well as Cyber Essentials Plus, which forms our external audits ourselves for any renewed certs that we have within our Birmingham HQ. We have around-the-clock coverage in regards to operation for 24/7 support with our partnerships and vendor alliances around any sort of triage for critical or security incidents. The socket today, our customers, they have access to over 100 SOC analysts. So think of, them as an extension of your team, and certainly obviously the day-to-day services that we provide, and we put wraps around any sort of cadence reviews or any ongoing tuning, development or optimization of our services. Typically organizations that we have within our SOC tend to see our team as an extension of theirs. Our breadth and depth in regards to experience, we've got very focused security personnel, so security analysts that have all been, if you like, accredited to the highest levels of all of our vendor certifications around the engineers for support, deployment, onboarding and professional services. As well as obviously we work typically with sort of industry leading tool sets, so not bleeding. So all of our tools tend to be recognized as mature and leading in the space that you would see from a top right Gartner Magic Quadrant. Jeff, next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the services that we've actually brought to the solution is utilizing a tool called ForcePoint. Some of you may well be familiar with the technology vendor. In essence, what we have done is look to protect the Azure virtual desktop that Mark has just sort of kindly gone over in regards to securing the web security controls via a proxy service. So this is looking at taking requests from the Azure virtual desktop environment for any web resources or web browsing, and basically rather than going directly out to the internet and serving those web pages, we actually break that connection by using a cloud proxy, which in turn then relays those requests to the original website. This allows us to basically put some of the security controls, one of them that Jeff mentioned about 1.4 around web security and locking down websites. The idea is that we can apply filtering rules to perform any content scanning, providing protection against any security threats or data loss or any inappropriate content. The solution itself as well is designed and aligned to CSCF Swift Security Controls Framework, and that sort of typically falls within the securing of your environment for security internet access and reduced attack surface exploits. Next slide, please. The web filtering, which is obviously underpinned by our technology and solution called ForcePoint, is actually a managed web security service. So typically the service looks to include some of the items that you can see on your screen. So we look to sort of build out web access control. So typically look to bring in best practices around policies that we do for other building societies. We help support on board and do the deployment assistance, support any policies by exception, but also as well, we can build upon not just looking at websites and web security, but also looking at application control. So this is looking to build in application control around common web platforms that align to typical building societies like Alliance Light version 2. We can do inspection of secure encrypted traffic. And one of the things that we do as part of the service is that we carry on with monthly policy and configuration reviews to ensure that we're optimally performing and protecting the environment around the Azure virtual desktop. Next slide, please. So in summary, some of the web security objectives that ForcePoint looks to protect in and around the Azure virtual desktop is looking to secure every user everywhere. So Jeff and Mark alluded to it a moment ago about that, we are now post-pandemic in a world where we're more mobile than ever. So typically, remote workers looking to connect in, or remote workers wherever they access the network, we would look to try and secure that with some of the security controls that we've mentioned. It brings massive amounts of integrated visibility and control. So we're actually able to monitor the use of any cloud applications that are either being accessed, where we can look to make a decision on whether we block these if they do seem to be deemed as a risk. But also as well, we can start to look and understand and discover if there is any shadow IT that may expose or potentially create a risk around any sort of cloud or web activity from within the Azure virtual desktop. And I think obviously I'm mindful of time, so I'm looking to hand this now back to Matt, I believe, and then hopefully we can open this up to any questions.
Thank you, Leighton. Yes, I encourage you to any questions, please, there's a chat box there's a ribbon at the bottom of the screen. There's a chat box that you can ask any questions of Jeff, Mark, or Leighton. That would be great if you could. Just really closing, potentially, is interesting in terms of embracing cloud technologies. A number of building societies are starting to look at this, and we've now transitioned a couple fully into the cloud, and it's been very successful. And there has been perception potentially that cloud has been less secure, or there's a risk. And when we delivered the desktop for Swift in Azure, and it went through the audit, it flew through, and it just really does paint the picture that actually the amount of investment that's gone into the Azure platform and services, especially along the security side, is immense. And we're finding you're improving your security posture, and it is a fantastic toolbox that you need to put together, that we've done. We're working with the building societies to do that now. So we see a lot of real benefit there. There's amongst the other benefits of moving into cloud, in terms of being able to run run out resources quickly, and scale down, scale up, and then you're moving into an evergreen platform effectively, and being able to present an IT services platform that is fit and ready for the future, in terms of embracing SaaS services and so forth. So is there any questions that anybody, I was just trying to think, has anybody got any questions that they would like to ask at this time? Jeff, in terms of, I think there's one come through. Jeff, in terms of is there a sort of a cutoff point in terms of being able to do something this year with yourself? Is there a sort of minimum or a maximum? What you should say?
I suppose ultimately there is a cutoff point. So Swift requires everybody to have attested by the end of December. And that being the case, we always encourage clients to start early. With our two-stage process, you can start very early, simply because you can get the first set underway. If there are gaps, the earlier you've done that, then you've got more time to address those. But from our point of view, we have accepted people in December, right at the beginning in the past. We try not to make it a panic, but certainly no, it's not too late for this year at all. The building societies in particular, their audits are usually some of the simpler ones that we do compared to the larger banks and bigger organizations, and so it isn't too late. I would get in contact pretty quickly, if I'm honest, because we'd like to get you underway sort of certainly by the beginning of November, and just try and take some of the panic away. And you might need a little bit of time to prepare if you're not doing that already. So yeah, having your initial preliminary audit at the beginning of November would be very helpful to make sure that perhaps you have completed by the end of November, beginning of December, and make it less of a panic. Yeah.
I mean, I would also reiterate, if you've got any sort of questions that follow after this webinar, we will be sending out the presentation of the video as well, that you can follow up with any questions that you would have in any aspect in terms of the process or cloud services security, for instance. We will be more than happy to respond to you. Is there any other further questions from anyone? No? Okay. Now, well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for everybody's time in attending today. I hope you got something out of it that it was worthwhile, and we'll follow up with the content, send it out to you as quick as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.